Now let's talk to our resident foreign policy expert, senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute, Michael Doran. Michael, thanks so much. Huge stuff happening here this week. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken headed to the Middle East in an attempt to build support for a draft Gaza ceasefire deal. However, it's not looking good. Have a look.
Hamas has proposed numerous changes to the proposal that was on the table. Some of the changes are workable. Some are not. A deal was on the table that was virtually identical to the proposal that Hamas put forward on May the 6th. Hamas could have answered with a single word, yes. Instead, Hamas waited nearly 2 weeks and then proposed more changes, a number of which go beyond positions that it previously taken and accepted.
Michael, there's a lot more to this, isn't there? I mean, it seems like Hamas can keep pushing for a tougher and tougher set of terms because Israel can't afford to lose U.S. support, particularly with Hezbollah attacking in the north. Tell us about it.
Well, that's thanks for having me, James. And you're exactly right. The administration, the Biden administration, is caught in a maze of its own assumptions. It's been putting pressure on Israel to move its position as close to Hamas's as possible. That after putting that pressure on Israel for about a month, the administration closed the gaps, and then it turned to Hamas, and Hamas refused to accept the deal and then started demanding more. Why wouldn't it? It sees that it doesn't have to make any concessions in order to get the United States to do its work for it and soften up the Israelis. And as you mentioned, in the north, Hezbollah is escalating against Israel. That's another form of pressure. If you're Hamas watching this picture, you can say, let's just hold out further and see how many more concessions we can get from the Israelis thanks to the American pressure.
Well, and so it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like Iran is slowly dialing up the heat on Israel. At the same time, Israel has been unable, not allowed to go as hard as it wanted to go after Hamas because of the U.S. But with Iran slowly dialing up the pressure on this, it seems like there's nowhere to go.
I think that's exactly right. But again, I think the key factor is the American policy, because the United States has put a protective shield over Iran. It restrained Israel when back in April, when there was that exchange of attacks between Iran and Israel. It restrained Israel before Iran attacked, and then it restrained Israel after Iran attacked.
This comes back from the Obama administration. All the Obama guys are back as retreads in the White House now under Biden. But what is the rationale for saying, oh, hey, Iran, they're not so bad. We want to make them legitimate. At some point, this seems like insanity.
Well, I think there's three main rationales, or three sort of baskets. One of them, which we don't have to really go deeply into, but it's exactly what you were talking about in the segment before you came to me, about the woke ideology that is now the dominant ideology. The woke foreign policy likes Iran and doesn't like Israel. It wants to downgrade Israel, and it wants to find an accommodation with Iran. That leads me to the second factor, which is that the administration has a theory that it is better to manage relations with Iran from this position of mutual non-belligerency, or offering the Iranians over and over a mutual non-belligerency. That's the best way to manage the whole region. And the third thing is just, of course, the election coming in November. The administration wants a quiet life coming into the election in November, and it thinks that the easiest way to dial down all the tension in the region is just to get Israel to make certain concessions, stop the war in Gaza, and then that immediately will stop the attacks from the Houthis and from Hezbollah and everybody else. So restraining Israel in the minds of the administration is the easiest way to get to a quiet life.
I mean, God, that's just insanely dysfunctional when you think about the implications for that. But I don't think they're going to have a quiet time of it to the election. We talk a lot about the border on this show, and scary story this week where 8 men with potential ties to ISIS out of Central Asia were arrested around New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. Officials said all 8 men crossed through the southern border into the U.S., and their criminal background checks came back clean. Have a listen to the acting ICE director's appalling reaction to this.
Customs and Border Protection is the ones who encounter them at the border. It's not us. But it's not that sometimes there's just no information on individuals. I mean, it's quite common where there's just nothing. You know, you don't have anything. It's no criminal convictions. There's no threat information or whatever on these individuals. Or maybe these individuals are from an area that are particularly of concern, but that pops up later when you get information later on.
Michael, I'm a little concerned that this is just sort of the reaction of immigration and customs officials. Oh, well, you know, we don't know anything about these guys. They walk across, who knows? Oh, they're ISIS. This is not good, is it?
Well, it's not the way I would run our border, but I don't get a say in this. I'm with you. I mean, I think everyone who looks at this, you know, with the sober eye, has to conclude that it's dysfunctional, but they want to get as many people in here as possible before the election. So it's clearly a policy at this point. I don't think you can look at what's been happening on the border and say that they're seriously trying to stop people from coming. On the contrary, they want more, and they want them to become Democratic voters.
Of course they do. And hey, if they happen to be ISIS, well, you know, what are you going to do? What's a little terrorism between friends? You know,
mistakes happen. What can you do?
These things happen. What can you do? Hey, I got to ask you about this crazy story, too. The Pentagon deployed 3 Navy destroyers and a maritime patrol aircraft this week to keep tabs on Russian ships that were conducting missile exercises and reportedly got within 30 miles off the Florida coast. And I think there were other Russian ships that were going to Cuba. Is there a kind of a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0 situation brewing down there around the Caribbean and Florida?
I don't think we need to go so far as Cuban Missile Crisis, but I think we're clearly being tested. We're being tested by this alliance or alignment, whatever you want to call it, this grouping of China, Russia, and Iran. They're testing us, probing, tying down resources. It's part of a general effort just to stretch out American resources as widely as possible and check for weaknesses. And sooner or later, I think I share with you the sense that the whole direction is bad. I don't want to predict cataclysm, but there's some ugliness in our future. I think you can see it pretty clearly.
I think, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Let's just leave it at ugliness. Michael Doran, thank you so much for your time, as always. Now, after the break, we're going to have a little poll-a-palooza and see what's going on in the polls. But first, Kamala Harris. Well, what a noble soul she is, choosing a life of public service over personal advancement. Why, she spoke about this just the other day. Have a listen.
To aspire to create wealth is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. If that is what one chooses. I, on the other hand, have chosen to live a life of public service. But I am all for any of you get yours if that's what you want, right?
Yeah, she's laughing all the way to the bank. According to Forbes magazine, that life of public service, as well as being married to prominent lawyer Doug Emhoff, means she's worth about $8 million. But yeah, you get yours.